Good afternoon and welcome to the latest lecture of the World War II Discussion Forum's Winter and Spring Series. I'm Greg McNeff, the founder and executive director of the group. Before I introduce this afternoon's speaker, I want to briefly cover the usual housekeeping items. First, our speaker has graciously agreed to take questions after his prepared remarks. You have two ways to ask a question. You can either use the raised hand feature at the bottom of your screen, and I will call on you to unmute your line, or you can use the box where it says question, and I will read your question out to our speaker. Regardless of the method you choose, please be respectful of our speaker, the audience, and the time. I think we all hate when there's questions in the queue that we don't get to. Second, donations are always appreciated, but not expected. Please note there is a donate tab on the website. Third, we have a YouTube channel, and this talk is being recorded for that. And I'd like to extend a welcome to the audience that watches these talks. They're actually significantly large, so I certainly appreciate the viewership. Fourth and finally, you can send any feedback through the website at wwiidf.org. Now to this afternoon's speaker, and someone I'm thrilled to have. Kevin Hymel is a contract historian at Arlington National Cemetery and a historian tour guide of Ambrose Historical Tours, leading the In Patton's Footstep Tour. For 15 years, he was the research director and regular contributor to World War II history and World War II quarterly. He is the author of 4 books, including Patton's Photographs, War as He Saw It. His article, Fighting a Two-Front War in World War II History, was made into the Netflix movie 6888, written and directed by Tyler Perry. Mr. Hymel has served as technical advisor to the film. Today, Kevin will discuss Patton and the Battle of the Bulge, which is drawn from the second of his 3-volume history on Patton, and I will let him speak further on that. I just want to note the reviews are really staggering. There were like 10 or 15, but I'm going to choose 2 close to home. One from NIMAS. Quote, while there have been many books written about Patton, Kevin has set himself apart from the pack with the depth of his research. Military historians and laymen alike would benefit from having this book on their shelf. If the second volume is half as good as the first, and it is, Patton's War will be top shelf for any serious historian. And then the strategy page, which I believe is run by Al Nofi, concludes, while there have been many books written about Patton, Kevin has set himself apart from the pack, again, with the depth of his research. This is a top shelf recommendation and something any serious historian of Patton should have available to them. With that, I will turn it over to Kevin.
Thank you, Greg. I appreciate that. So I'm going to be speaking about Patton and the Battle of the Bulge, mostly his offensive to the north that's going to end on December 27th. And hopefully I'll tell you guys some stuff you've never heard before. I've done a lot of in-depth research about that. And so let's kind of just get going. So normally when I give this talk, I ask for a show of hands on who's seen the movie Patton. I'm not going to do that this time for an obvious reason. But if you've seen the movie, there's a very famous scene where German tanks are rolling over barriers in the snow. And you cut to Patton and he says, the Germans haven't launched a winter offensive since Frederick the Great. And then he says, basically, therefore, I believe that's exactly what they're going to do. That's a very famous element of the Patton story. Just about every biography about Patton includes it, and stories on the Battle of the Bulge. I've used it myself. And where that story comes from is Patton's diaries. So these are the typed up diaries that his wife put out, I think it was 1952. And if you can see the page right here we're looking at, there is a line there that says, furthermore, the First Army is making a terrible mistake by leaving its 8th Corps static, as it is highly probable the Germans are building up east of them. And then he says, the only way to think about these things is to remember what cannot be cured must be endured, and Bradley is without inspiration for all equality. And notice that's November 25th. The Battle of the Bulge is going to be launched on December 16th. So here's Patton, projecting what's going to happen all the way back, right around Thanksgiving. And for those of people who are reading this and aren't very bright, there's a number 1 right there. If you go to the bottom of the page, there's a footnote. It was opposite 8th Corps that von Rundstedt broke through 21 days later. Oh my God, Patton has predicted the Battle of the Bulge. Pretty amazing, right? Not so much. As I said, these are the typed up diaries that his wife put together from his handwritten diaries. I went to his handwritten diaries, which, by the way, are at the Library of Congress. And even though this is kind of chicken scratch, that line is not there. You can see where it says inspiration and all for equality. He may also be jealous. And then you see what can't be cured must be endured. So that line does not exist on November 25th, 1944. All right. Now, Patton's going to drive north and relieve Bastogne on December 26, 1944. The day after that, he is going to write a line like that. You can see December 27th, 1944. You go about 6 lines up from the bottom, and it says, "Of course, Bradley made a bad mistake in leaving passive at the front the 8th Corps." So where Patton is reflecting on this, his wife took that sentence from December 27th and moved it back to November 25th. So, and it's a shame because what Patton does during the Battle of the Bulge is amazing. It doesn't need to be bumped up from brilliant commander to prophet, you know. But that was something I actually looked forward to writing about, his predicting of the Bulge, and was very disappointed when I couldn't find it in the handwritten diaries. But I'm an historian and I have to go by what the facts are. So with that in mind, why don't we start talking about the Battle of the Bulge? Oh no, I'm gonna tell you a little bit more about this. Um, Patton had an intelligence branch, the G2, under a guy named Oscar Koch. And a lot of people say, oh, well, Koch saw this coming and was giving Patton information about it. Well, I went back to the actual periodic reports that the G2 put out every day. Now, these reports are about 26 pages long, so an Army commander isn't going to read the whole thing. What he is going to read is the enemy capabilities. So this is November 25th, 1944, on this page, and it says, what are the enemy capabilities? 1, the enemy is capable of defending and delaying from prepared positions for an effort to block our advances and attacks on the Siegfried Line, the German defense line. Number 2, the enemy is capable of counterattacking locally with infantry and armor, particularly against our main efforts in an effort to contain those advances, on the Siegfried Line. 3, the enemy is capable of a general withdrawal. And number 4, the enemy is capable at any time of reinforcing against a section of our zone of advance. So this enemy capabilities on November 25th is repeated in every intelligence report every day, all the way up to December 16th. And if you look at December 16th, it says enemy capabilities, no change. See 3rd Army G2 periodic report for December 14th. So not only are they repeating it, but they're basically saying, same as last time, go look at the last one. So there wasn't this, great examination by Oscar Koch predicting anything. He did tell Patton one day there was a buildup of German army in the German city of Trier. And Patton said, okay, what does that mean? And Koch said, I don't know. So again, a story that's been kind of blown up that the facts just don't support. One of the last things I'll mention is Patton was going to move his headquarters to a place called Saint Avold, and he kept putting it off. Now, my mentor, Martin Blumenson, who wrote the Patton papers, he thought this was Patton's sixth sense telling him not to move yet, that something was in the works. Well, what actually happened was Charles Codman, one of Patton's aides, was going to Saint Avold looking for a new headquarters. And the Germans, when they would pull out of an area, would put a lot of delayed fuse bombs that could be delayed up to a week and even longer. And so he spots a building at the top of a hill and he goes, boy, that's it. That's our new headquarters. And boom, the thing blew up. And that is why Patton kept delaying where he was going to put his next headquarters. It wasn't a sixth sense on the Battle of the Bulge. So now getting into the Battle of the Bulge, December 16th, the Germans launch their largest counteroffensive against the Western Allies of the entire war. It's going to go through Luxembourg and Belgium. It's going to catch everybody off guard and surprise. Patton does not predict a thing. And as this happens, it's really Dwight D. Eisenhower that gets a sense that this is a big counteroffensive. And he tells Omar Bradley, the 12th Army Group Commander, that he's going to need to start pulling armor from the north and the south and sending it into this fray, into this bulge. And Bradley says, Patton's not going to like this. And Eisenhower says, tell George Ike's running the damn war. And I think that was sort of a moment for Eisenhower where he's kind of taking the grips of this battle that he realizes is big and that he has to fight. Now, when the word comes down to Patton that he's got to give up one of his armored divisions, He's really against this. He thinks it's a localized attack and people are panicking. In fact, at the sound of the guns, he starts moving away. He does not want to get sucked into this. He starts giving instructions to his 6th Armored Division commander and 4th Armored Division commander to get occupied, get busy. They don't want to get pulled into this fight. Patton at this time has 3 corps, okay? An army is made up of corps. In the north, he's got the 20th Corps under a guy named Walker. In the south, the 12th Corps under a guy named Manton Eddy. And in reserve is the 3rd Corps under a guy named Milliken. And his battle plan is to send his 2 corps forward and then split and have Milliken drive up the middle. It's called Operation Tink. And so when you hear all this stuff about Patton moving his whole 3rd Army north, it's really not going to be that way because, like I said, he's got 1 corps in reserve. The Germans break through with armor. One of the most important drives is to the town of Bastogne that has 7 roads, vital for communications and transportation. This is where Troy Middleton, the 8th Corps commander, has got his headquarters. And he realizes he's being overwhelmed, so he is throwing everything he can to slow the Germans down before they get to Bastogne. But he realizes Bastogne looks like it'll be overrun. He's going to send elements of the 9th Armored and the 10th Armored, and they do slow, but they do not stop the Germans. But those efforts give enough time for Eisenhower to get the 101st Airborne and other elements into Bastogne to set up a perimeter. So this is Troy Middleton. He's fought under Patton through most of the war, North Africa, Sicily, and now in Europe. He was with a different army, the 1st Army, during this attack. But for what he had, he fights a pretty smart battle, knowing what he can and cannot do. Once the 101st arrives with Anthony McCullough, there's the 101st arriving. Notice there's no snow when the 101st gets to Bastogne, and this is around the 18th of December. He meets with Anthony McCullough. He was temporarily the division commander. He's actually the head of the artillery, but the division commander was off in Washington, Maxwell Taylor, and so McCullough is in charge. And he tells McCullough, fight it out here as long as you can. I have to pull my headquarters down to a place called New Chateau, but I will be in communication with you, and you've got this. And so McCullough takes over Middleton's headquarters in Bastogne. Now, Omar Bradley, the 12th Army Group commander, is going to call Patton to his headquarters on December 18th. And Patton goes up there. He's moving his troops south. He doesn't want to get involved in this battle. And Bradley pulls back the curtain on a map to show Patton the extent of the attack. And basically, it goes from the north to the south part of this map. And Patton sees not the depth of the attack, but the width of it, how large this is. And he immediately realizes what is going on. And Bradley turns to him and says, George, what can you do? And to Patton's credit, he clicks right in. I can move 4th Armored up these roads. I can get 6th Armored. And he's giving Bradley just what he needs. He's giving him solutions on how they're going to defeat this. And I think Bradley actually sleeps a little bit better that night than he had been for a while. Patton is then going to go back down to his headquarters. He's going to stop along the way and visit Walton Walker. Now, remember, he's the 20th Corps commander. It's the farthest north corps. And basically, he's going to tell him, listen, you're going to be moving your corps north. Everybody else is going to hold still. You've got the ball here. But after leaving somewhere along the road back to his headquarters, I think Patton changes his mind. And that's where he decides, no, I'll keep Walker still. I'll keep him in position. And I'll move Eddy's division, the 12th Corps, north to join Milliken. So we have a big, strong offensive. So that night, he tells his staff to go to sleep. He doesn't give them any orders. He wants them well rested for the morning, and he plans an early morning meeting. So he gathers. Now, his headquarters is in Metz, France, well south of all of this. And then next morning, he holds a staff meeting. He explains what's happening in the north, and he says, let's work on 3 plans to defeat this German attack. The first plan, and what's interesting is he gives each plan a very simple name, so that when he goes up to Verdun, meets with Eisenhower that morning or that afternoon, all he has to say is one word and his staff will know what to do. So the first plan is called scent, and that is to cut the bulge off at its base. The next plan is nickel, hit the bulge on the nose. And the last plan is dime, drive for Bastogne. So his staff is going to start working on this, and Patton's got his 3 words to take to Verdun. So December 19th, Patton's going to arrive here at Bradley's headquarters in Verdun. For the longest time, I could not find this place. Tour guides were sending me in the wrong places. This is actually a French cavalry headquarters, and you can always tell something that has to do with the U.S. Army in World War II in Europe because there'll almost always be an American tank or vehicle outside. And if you look at the corners of the building, at the ends of each of those bushes, on the left, you've got a scout car, and on the right, you have a light tank. So that's kind of your hint that, yes, this is where it all occurred. So Eisenhower is going to arrive at this meeting. Bradley, Patton are going to be there. Jacob Devers, who commands an army group south of Bradley, is also going to attend. And, they're all kind of milling around. Patton is a little bit nervous. Everybody's smoking. They've got their coats on because the room is very cold. And Eisenhower walks in. Everybody stands to attention. And he basically says, all I want to see are smiles on your guys' faces. This is an opportunity. And Patton says, well, let him drive all the way to Paris and we can cut him off. And Eisenhower says, George, I appreciate it, but let's be a little bit more pragmatic about this. So the first thing that happens is they're briefed by General Strong. This is Eisenhower's intelligence chief. And basically he maps out what has occurred, but he has no idea what the end game is for the Germans. The German idea is to attack a port called Antwerp up in Belgium, which not only will be, capturing a main port by the Allies that's desperately needed, but it'll separate the British and American armies. In Hitler's mind, he's going to then roll back both armies and then turn and defeat the Soviet Union. That's the pie in the sky idea. Nobody in this room has any idea of this. They think they might be going for the French industrial cities like Lille. They think this might be a precursor to a bigger attack somewhere else, as the Germans had done in 1940. They just don't know. And so they go around the room, and it's Patton that really delivers a solution. And he, gives his 3, plans. He says, I can be attacking north in 2 days. And Eisenhower says, George, don't be facetious. I had to look that word up. He says, that's not enough time. So he gives Patton a 3rd day. So that's something, if you've seen the movie, he says in 2 days, everybody freaks out. It wasn't 2 days. It was 3 days. And Eisenhower knows how to fight a major campaign. If the Germans, or if the enemy drives a big wedge into your lines, the first things you want to do is stabilize those corners so the enemy can't broaden the attack. And that is his main concern. Now, in the north, this has already been taken care of at a place called Elsborn Ridge, where the Americans have pulled back to a high ridge that the Germans can't take, and they bring up artillery. So that's stable. In the south, there's a town called Etternacht on the Sur River. The Germans have taken it. And if Patton can take it back, that will stabilize the southern shoulder of the Bulge. Now, Omar Bradley's main concern is Bastogne. He wants to take it and use that as his main drive, not only because he has troops there, but because he's realizing he's being separated but from his first army. He commands 1st and 3rd, Patton's 3rd. And he will eventually lose communications with First Army enough that Eisenhower, and it's a very tough decision, places First Army under British General Montgomery's command, or Field Marshal at this point. And that infuriates Bradley because Bradley's now just commanding one army, and that's Patton. So once Patton says this, that he can make this attack, Eisenhower gives him the green light, and he turns to one of his aides and says, dime. And the aide gets on the phone, gives a call, bam, his troops are going to start, the planners know what to do now. And there's a bit of relief in the room. Like one of the witnesses said that when Patton made this claim, there was a shuffling of feet. People were really nervous. One of the officers in the room said he was almost bowled out of his chair by the idea. But as soon as Patton comes up with this plan, or it presents it, that, and at this point, it's just a general offensive north. Everybody starts clicking in. Their logistics officers saying, hey, we can get you 100 trucks, to help move your troops. The ideas start clicking, and just the atmosphere in the room changes. So once the call is made, dime, The meeting is broken up, and Eisenhower turns to Patton as they walk out of the room, and he says, "You know, George, every time I get promoted, I get attacked." So when he was in North Africa and got promoted to 4-star, he had been that was when the Germans attacked at Kasserine Pass. Just days earlier, he had been informed that he had earned his 5th star, and here comes the Battle of the Bulge. And sure enough, without missing a beat, Patton says back to Eisenhower, "And every time you get attacked, I bail you out." Now, if you're looking at the map, you can see Bastogne right there in the center, and one of the images, it's not taken yet. Eventually, obviously, will be surrounded. But then if you follow it down to the elbow of the blue line, that's where Eternacht is. And so Patton has a dual responsibility now to get to Bastogne and Eternacht. And for as many of you have heard of Bastogne, I'm just as sure none of you have heard of Eternacht. It's not given the love it deserves, but it is just as important in a lot of ways for this offensive. So Patton's going to leave this meeting. He's going to change his headquarters to Luxembourg City, but he is going to basically spend the entire day and pretty much the next day in a Jeep in the cold with a radio and a map. And he is going to be radioing down to not just divisions and corps, but to battalions, to, independent tank battalions, to hospitals, evacuation hospitals, telling them what roads to move north so they won't clash into other American troops moving north. And it's kind of brilliant to the fact that the next day when he's in Luxembourg City and his headquarters guys get up there, he jokes that they're a waste of taxpayer money because he's been doing more with the Jeep driver and a radio than the whole staff had done. And I got to say, as these troops start heading north, it's really going to change not just the military situation, but just the general feeling. Now, this is a picture of the 80th Infantry Division moving north. Notice no snow. That's going to come later. And this is one of the few photographs I actually found of the movement north. Eisenhower does put a 24-hour blackout out on all news. It's very rare that you find photographs of pre-Bastogne Battle of the Bulge. A lot of the photographs you're probably familiar with were taken in January. As these troops move north, they're going to come up to Luxembourg City. Luxembourg City is built over a large crevasse, and so it has a number of bridges. And as these troops start crossing over these bridges, the Luxembourgians start cheering them. They had taken down red, white, and blue bunting around the city when the German attack started. Well, they start putting it back up. And as the troops march through, they cheer them, and they start chanting, "Patton, Patton, Patton." That is the name recognition Patton has at this stage of the war. Omar Bradley's staff is got trash cans outside the headquarters. They're burning papers. That's how confident they are. They need to pull back. And they said once they see all these headquarters guys coming with the Third Army patch, it just gives them this great sense of ease, and they return to work. And this is where Patton is going to have his headquarters for the next few months. Here is a map that Patton had made showing the movement north. And you can see it's really the southern part of his line that everybody pulls out. You can see the numbers 80th Division, 5th Infantry, and then heading north. Now you can see Bastogne at the top left. If you follow over to the right, you'll see Diekirch, and then right of that, Eternacht. That's that key town on the Sur River that Patton knows he has to take. Now for the offensive on December 22nd to Bastogne, Patton's going to launch 3 divisions. For Eternacht, it's really going to be only the 5th Infantry Division. Now, on December 22nd, the green light goes up, 6:30 in the morning. The attack starts for Bastogne. The attack on Eternacht is not going to happen until 12 noon. And Patton wrote in his diary, that's the one he's really nervous about because he doesn't feel he's got the strength for it. So this is a photograph of troops from the 29th Division actually launching that attack. Now you can see the snow, and now you can see they're actually wearing a lot more heavier clothing. They're a lot warmer. The 26th is going to be on one of the sides of the 4th Armored Division. The 4th Armored is going to be the spearhead of this attack. And they're going to be driving north to Bastogne. Now, while this is going on, the attacks on Eternacht are occurring too. Now, like I said, the drive for Bastogne, 1 armored division, 2 infantry divisions. The attack on Eternacht, 1 infantry division. But they've got a secret weapon that the Allies have been holding off, until they really needed it. This is called the proximity fuse. This is an artillery round that, instead of hitting the ground and blowing up, actually uses radar to blow up in the air and have a much more effective explosion. The 5th Infantry troops, they on their first attacks, they're repulsed. They start using the proximity fuse. They start making progress to the point where they're overlooking Eternacht, and they start shelling it with the proximity fuses. The Germans on the west bank panic and start charging across a bridge to the east bank, but the shelling is so intense with these proximity fuses, they turn around and run back. So it's almost too effective a weapon. Meanwhile, like I said, the troops are driving on Bastogne. On December 26th in the morning, the 5th Infantry is going to launch another major attack on Eternacht. This is going to drive the Germans out to the point where they're swimming across the Sur River. They don't even have time to cross the bridge. And this gives Patton great relief that, he's secured the shoulder. And part of the reason that's important is the Germans can't attack through there and knock into his attack going up into Bastogne. So now he's got a secure drive to Bastogne going. Now, but it is not an easy haul. The Germans are contesting a lot of it. The assumption is that one of the combat commands, so armored divisions are broken into 3 combat commands: Combat Command A, Combat Command B, and Combat Command R for reserve. And they're made up of tank and infantry and artillery battalions. So the main drive, everybody assumes, is going to be with Combat Command A. It's the strongest. It's going over paved roads. And in fact, Maxwell Taylor, the head of the 101st, has flown back to Europe, and he's in a Jeep behind those guys. I should mention December 22nd, when Patton launches the attack, that is also the day the Germans present a surrender offer to Anthony McAuliffe in Bastogne. And, it's very famous that he responds nuts, and it's a great show of strength. What's not covered in a lot of the accounts is the fact that by the time the Germans deliver this, Third Army is already pressed at least 3 miles into the German salient. And McAuliffe knows this. He knows relief is coming. And I think that really kind of strengthens his hand with the Germans of why he refuses that surrender. Now, there is a lot of controversy that people say that Patton didn't relieve Bastogne. They linked up a very resentful thing with veterans of the 101st. That didn't really happen at the time. That was something that developed later. And almost all the communiques between McAuliffe and Patton and Middleton, McAuliffe is saying, get up here and relieve us. He uses the word relieve. He says, we're hanging on by our fingernails. They don't have a hospital. They've got a lot of wounded. In fact, McAuliffe is driving a truck around the perimeter, picking up American dead bodies because he's trying to hide from the Germans how bad the casualties are inside Bastogne. So the main drive under CCA gets stopped by the Germans, a little town, it's escaping my name, Chaumont. And that is the 8th Tank Battalion that gets, they roll down into this town, and the Germans just shell all the tanks, and they have to pull back. So the main line of attack before Christmas Day, before December 25th, is stymied, is stopped. Meanwhile, Combat Command R is kind of out of a job. It's sweeping around behind the 2 other combat commands. And they're given this mission to go up to the left flank and protect, because there's rumors that the Germans might attack there. And as they're heading there, they come to a town called Sabret. And you can see it sort of dead center at the lower part of the map, Sabret. And as they head there, they come to a town called Clochemont. And the tankers, under a guy named Craigton Abrams, stop at this intersection. And they're looking at this road that goes into Bastogne. They're looking at the road to Sabret. And Abrams looks up and he sees all these C-47 aircraft flying in to relieve Bastogne. And parachutes start dropping as they get over the town. And then they start getting knocked out of the sky. And this really ticks him off. And he says, you know what? What if we were to just drive hell for leather straight up this road into Bastogne and relieve it today? This is the day after Christmas. So he sends the radio communique up through Milliken, the 3rd Corps commander, gets to Patton. They give permission. He goes to one of the tank commanders, a guy named Bodges, who's got a tank with extra thick armor on the front called a jumbo tank. And he says, go get those boys in Bastogne. So he's going to spearhead, Bodges is going to spearhead the attack. There's only one town between Bastogne and where they are. It's called Assenois. And as they close in on Assenois, they call in artillery to keep the Germans down. The idea is to drive as fast as you can, get the enemy to put their heads down. Don't stop and fight the enemy. Get them to put their heads down so you can drive through. And that's exactly what they do. They call in artillery on Assenois. The tanks start racing in. They've got half tracks behind them full of troops. And they've got a guy in a Jeep calling in the artillery, and he's going to tell it to stop just as the Americans get into the village. Well, the Germans hit the tank. I'm sorry, they hit the Jeep that he's in, and the artillery continues. So the troops are going into a town as it's being shelled. So they're coming under fire too, and there's going to be a lot of confusion. And in this fight, Bages and two other tanks, as well as two half tracks, actually make it through the town before a telephone pole gets hit and goes down and knocks into or over a half track, blocking the entire rest of the column. Fortunately, an airman and a little Piper Cub sees the confusion, calls for the artillery to stop. Creighton Abrams is actually going to be one of the guys jumping out of his tank and trying to manhandle this telephone pole out of the way. So the American attack into Bastogne is now down to 3 tanks and 2 troop carriers. As they accelerate, as they get out of the town, the tanks start distancing themselves from the half tracks because the half tracks have so many troops in them. So Bages, another tank, one of the half tracks go by. The Germans run out into the road and put down landmines. So one of the half tracks hits it and blocks the tank behind it. So now the entire offensive is 2 tanks and a half track. And as they're going, Bages is having his tankers turn to the left and right and fire into the forest. Again, just keep the Germans' heads down. We don't want to engage them. He comes up on a pillbox and fires on it. Now, according to his account, he kills 20 Germans in that pillbox. I've been to the pillbox. There's no way he could keep 20 people in it. Maybe they were around it. But he knocks out this pillbox, and then he sees troops to his left. And he has his tanker turn the cannon that way, and he can't tell whether they're Germans or Americans. And he calls out, Lieutenant Bages, 4th Armored Division, identify yourself. They don't say anything. So he repeats it. Lieutenant Bages, 4th Armored Division, identify yourselves. And one of the guys stands up and says, Corporal Webster, 101st Airborne, damn glad to see you. And with that, I'm sorry, there's the planes going over with the parachutes. And there's the first tank into Bastogne. That's Bages' tank. Bastogne is relieved. December 26, 1944. Now, there's a lot of fighting to go to eventually suppress the entire Bulge and to defeat Germany. But that's the story of how Bastogne is relieved. So there's the tanks rolling through. This picture was actually taken the day after the relief. Again, 24-hour blackout on everything. Patton is going to go up there on December 30th. He's going to meet with McAuliffe and a lieutenant colonel named Chapuis, who had stopped a German offensive from the west going into Bastogne. He presents them both with medals. You can see them on their uniforms. And he's then going to drive around Bastogne to check with the troops. And McAuliffe says to him, sir, please drive slowly so the troops can see you. And so he's driving along one road and he hears some machine gun fire and he rolls up and he sees these American troops laying in a ditch. He said, what are you doing? Get your asses up. And he didn't realize that the Germans were firing on these guys with machine guns. But when they heard Patton's vehicle come in, they got up and ran away. There's another incident where he comes across a 101st Airborne captain calling in artillery on German tanks. And one round actually lands in the tank turret and blows it up. And Patton says, good shooting, son. And so that's Patton, the real frontline general, visiting the troops in the middle of a fight. And I really need to stress, and if I'm kind of stressing the obvious, this is his victory. It's really Omar Bradley's theater, but Patton is the only Army commander in town. If the relief of Bastogne worked, he deserves the credit. And if it failed, it would have been on his shoulders too. So he's the one that took the risks. He's the one that organized the fight, and he's the one that deserves the credit. So that's pretty much it from me. I'm happy to take any questions, answer anything. Greg, you're back on.
Yeah, thanks. That was great, Kevin. Wow, the queue. I don't even think you guys need instructions anymore. Yeah, James, I think you were first up, so I'll mute your line, then I'll go Evan, Mike, and Mark. And then Alex. Yeah. James, you should be good to go.
Hey, James.
Hi there. Thanks so much for your presentation today. I wanted to ask, why do you think so many years after the Battle of the Bulge, Patton is the field army commander who gets most of the credit for winning the battle? I ask because, as I understand it, Simpson transferred most of the divisions of the Ninth Army to the First Army, and Hodges of the First Army did most of the fighting in the battle and confronted higher quality German panzer armies versus the primarily Volksgrenadier Seventh Army Patton was fighting.
Right. So, a couple of reasons. One, Simpson's Ninth Army was not in the fray, really. He was transferring units. He was being a very good team player, but it just simply was not in his theater. Hodges, of course, is the one that takes it on the nose. And through the opening stages of the battle, and I've gone back and forth with other historians about this, he's either got some sort of flu, or a lot of people say he had a mental breakdown, but he's pretty MIA. And his chief of staff, I think his name's Bean, was really kind of running the headquarters. When I've examined the northern section, is really the credit goes to a lot of lower level commanders. Also, when it came under Montgomery as the theater commander, he refuses any offensive action. His idea is to let the German attack kind of break on the rocks. He gave an analogy like waves breaking on the rocks. And once that's defeated, we'll go on the offensive, which is an effective method of fighting. But if you have an entire other army in the south pushing up by being static, you're not helping them at all. And one of the corps commanders, Lawton Collins, he was looking at the maps going, we got to go on the attack. We've got these opportunities. But Montgomery refused. They wouldn't start any attacks until January of 45. And it really frustrated Eisenhower. Here he's got, on the southern end, he's got motion, he's got action, whereas the northern side is a holding action. And it's a shame because there's a lot of heroic fighting that goes on, and some of it by Army engineers that are blowing bridges as tanks are rolling right at them, and putting small units together and really stopping Joachim and Piper, who's kind of the spearhead of that attack. And you're right, they are facing the majority of the Tiger tanks, the better trained troops, because that northern army, because it's the 5th and the 6th Panzer in the north, that 6th Panzer, that's the one driving for Antwerp. And so that's the one with the extra punch. Fortunately for the Americans, the army commander, Dietrich, is not that great. And we're able to hold him up. The southern commander, his name escapes me right now, is much better trained, much better, actuated. It's actually the German 7th Army, a very weak, mostly infantry army that faces Patton. And during the planning stages, General Brandenburg, the commander of the 7th Army, goes, "Oh my God, you've got me going against the best commander on the other side. You've got to give me armor." And they said, "We're going to give you an armored division. Don't worry about a thing." And they never gave it to him. So I hope that answers your question.
Thank you very much.
You got it.
Thanks, Jim. Evan, if you want to unmute your line and ask your question.
Oh, thank you. I was panicking because I couldn't see an unmute button. Thank you so much for this talk. I kind of love listening. Anything Patton related, I just find incredibly fascinating. So, based on what you said, you visited all these areas. I curious about what was the most fascinating thing you saw. What was the most disappointing thing you saw? If you were to go there tomorrow, what would you want to see again?
So I actually lead tours of all these areas. It's in the footsteps of Patton tour. So Battle of the Bulge related. Well, I love Luxembourg City. Bastogne has some fantastic museums. One that has an entire hangar full of World War II tanks, both American and German. Love that. On the northern side, I gave a tour one time and the people were disappointed, but there's actually a marker where the tip of the spear German tank is knocked out, and that's the official spot where the Battle of the Bulge ends, the offensive part of the Germans ends. And I think that's really cool, but this group I was with, they weren't impressed by it. The least impressive thing, it's called the Martisson, and it's a memorial in Bastogne, and it's got multiple points to it. It's about 2, maybe 3 stories high, and you climb up steps. It's an outdoor memorial, and it's got all the divisions and their patches around it. And they've got, pointers that, this is in this direction, but it's all just kind of forest. There's nothing to see. And so I kind of skip it on my tours because it's a lot of nothing, if you ask me. So that's my high and my low.
Thank you.
Yeah. Come on my tour.
Thanks, Evan. Mike, if you want to unmute your line and ask your question.
Hey, Mike.
Yes. Hi, how are you?
All right.
Great talk. You did a lot of good research, so
Thank
I
you.
commend you for that. And I commend you for clearing up a lot of the myths.
It's a
including-
big job.
Yeah. Well, I always considered Patton, the movie Patton, to be an overrated propaganda piece, but that's besides the point. Questions are, first of all, I know somebody who was with CCA, Combat Command A, and he said when they were pulled back, they were really pretty much at Bastogne.
Yes.
When they were pulled back, he said they didn't know why they were pulled back. He
Right.
said, I said, well, you were under attack, etc. He said, no, there was merely nothing coming in. We were just, and he was at the tip of the 4th Armored Spearhead there. And
So, oh yeah, go on.
yeah, no, so he said they were just told to pull back. And of course, the joke that was going around is, oh, they were pulled back because Patton wasn't there yet. So he wanted to be there with the frontline troops, but that was obviously not the case. But the fact is, so there's some confusion. They said, in other words, I'm unclear about, they said they were under attack. Of course, what I heard from this fellow is that, actually, he was a good friend of the family. He said that, no, they didn't know why they were pulled back. That's one question. And the second question is, as far as Montgomery in the north, at what point did they figure out that the attack was heading towards Antwerp? And might not that have been the wisest thing to do, just in case the attack from the south, Patton's attack, did not work?
Right.
Two separate questions.
So I'll answer the first one. So I talked about Bradley and Patton meeting on December 18th, and Patton telling me get the 4th Armored moving up and the 6th Armored, all this stuff. And Patton leaves. And while Patton's on the road, Bradley gets nervous and says, you know what, I need part of the 4th Armored in Bastogne. So he calls Patton's headquarters and as Patton's chief of staff, and he tells him, move, I know 4th Armored's moving up to this location to begin the attack, but I want part of it to keep going up to Bastogne. And so that was CCA. And they basically broke down into specific task forces. And so this one group, it was called Task Force Ewell, after the infantry commander, they go up into Bastogne. And while they're there, the 8th Tank Battalion is waiting for them a little further south of that. And they start finding all these like tracks and empty American vehicles. And they realize the Germans had already passed through. Meanwhile, Patton, when he starts organizing all this, he finds out what Bradley has done and he goes berserk and says, get that element back. I want to have a strong attack when we do launch this. Patton saw that as weakening his punch. Now, was it wrong or right? I don't know, because you would have had more armor in Bastogne, but that was a big resupply problem in Bastogne. They can resupply airborne troops easily, but armor needs fuel and heavy ammo. So I think Patton did the right thing by pulling that element of 4th Armored back so that he could have that strong attack going north. So what your friend said is exactly right. That's exactly what happened. And then the next thing, I don't know if they ever did discover that was the eventual cause for the Battle of the Bulge, the relief of Antwerp. They got so involved with the fighting, and because of Bastogne, Hitler started shifting troops from the north to Bastogne to crush it. once Patton is broken through. So I don't know exactly when they made the if and when they made the realization that that Antwerp was the end goal.
Right. One other thing, and wouldn't you say that the success of Patton's attack was really due more to, let's say, with the Fourth Armored Division, was through again because of the ingenuity, tactical ingenuity of the lower commanders on the scene. I mean, he initiated the attack. That was brilliant, but most of what happened was really due to the men on the scene in the field.
I would agree with that, because one of the mistakes Patton makes, he goes against one of his own sort of maxims of war, where he's telling them to attack 24/7 to get to Bastogne. And he's not doing this out of some tactical brilliant reason. He's actually worried that Eisenhower is going to fire him for not getting to Bastogne fast enough. He's telling commanders, I've told Eisenhower we're going to be in there in 6 hours. And at one point Eisenhower calls him and Patton's like, we're going to get there, don't worry. And Eisenhower's like, George, calm down. As long as you're moving, I'm happy. So Eisenhower was keeping his head. Patton was kind of getting almost too involved. And that is going to exhaust elements of, well, not only the 4th Armored, but 80th, 26th. And that's why Combat Command R is so successful, because they're in the rear and they're able to rest while the other guys are kind of getting burned out fighting around the clock. So Patton does kind of make a tactical mistake, but it is those boots on the ground. Craigton Abrams looking at those planes flying over, and making that decision. And there's probably too many examples I could give, but I think the assumption was that the American army was going to fold much like the French army of 1944, and it was a direct opposite. Guys were ticked off. They were mad that the Germans were doing this, and they were ready to seek revenge. There was a town north of Bastogne called Noville that the 10th Armored was holding with support from the 101st. And the intelligence guys said, we had trouble getting German prisoners and questioning them, because when we get a prisoner, the 101st guys would shoot him. They'd pull him out of the interrogation and shoot him. They were so mad. So I think the guys on the ground reacted with a fury the Germans were not expecting.
Wow, thank you. That's another myth that was broken there. Thank you very much.
Happy to do it. Read my books. It'll break a lot of myths.
Thanks, Mike. Mark, if you want to unmute your line, and then Alex will go to you.
Hey, Mark.
Hey, thank you very much, Kevin. This was very interesting. I have 2 questions. One, the first one may be a bit out of scope, but in the Battle of the Bulge, towards the end, at the final, the greatest extension of the Bulge, the Eisenhower decided to kind of I want to say reduce the bulge, bit by bit, as opposed to trying to pinch it off at the source. I'm wondering why they did that, because it seems more obvious to me, like you cut them off. And the second question is, how did the Germans perceive Patton in relation to all the other Western generals through the war, and how did that change from his beginning in North Africa to the end in Bavaria?
Okay. So for your first question about why did they cut the bulge off and reduce it instead of cutting it out the base, the person who really wanted it cut where it did follow through, was Omar Bradley, because once Bastogne was relieved, Patton was like, okay, now I'm ready to break through Edirnacht and head north and cut this whole thing off. He kept talking about St. Vith in the north. That's where he wanted to go. But Bradley, looking at the map, saw the progress to Bastogne and said, well, if we can keep driving to this town, Falaise, we can cut it off at the waist, and that will give me back command of First Army. Like I said, he was humiliated by having an army taken away from him. And unfortunately, that was the big motivation. Another element that I discovered in my research I never heard of before. So this drive to Falaise is almost shorter than the drive to Bastogne, but it takes longer. And a lot of historians talk about the snow and the terrible conditions that followed. But there was something going on that people don't seem to connect to the Battle of the Bulge. January 1st, Hitler launches Operation Norwind. And so this is attack south of Patton with
Alsace.
the Colmar Pocket. And as Patton is making his drive to Houffalize, Bradley and Eisenhower are taking armored divisions away from him and sending them south because of concerns with Colmar Pocket. I really haven't seen this in any books, but as I tracked through the diaries of everybody and saw the armored movements, and it was really frustrating because the infantry and armor were attacking a town, and all of a sudden the armor turns south, and the infantry is like, "Where are you going?" But that's the enemy gets a vote. There was a bigger picture campaign going on, and so because of that, they're taking armored divisions away from Patton in that drive to Houffalize. So that really weakens his drive. He will eventually take it. And then continue his drives to break it from the south, but not as strong as he wanted because he doesn't have the armor that's being sent south. I think 4 armored divisions are sent south altogether. So that was the first one. I'm sorry, can you repeat the second question?
Yeah, how was Patton perceived
how was
by
Patton
the
viewed?
Germans?
Yeah.
From the beginning, compared to other Allied generals, from the beginning in North Africa to the end in Bavaria.
So just overall, they did consider him the best ground commander. The Soviets even said he was one of the best. I've seen numbers of accounts where they say, we just don't know where this Patton guy is going to strike next. Everybody's worried about him. Von Rundstedt famously said, "Patton, he was your best," during a post-war interview. Now, when he comes into combat in North Africa, he's kind of an unknown factor. But by the time the Sicilian campaign ends, he's on the German radar to the point where Axis Sally, Patton is going to take a ship. God, it was like the Penrose or the it was something with a P, and he was going to take a ship from Sicily to England, to get on with the next stage of the war. And Axis Sally gets on the radio and says, "Oh, that pesky Patton is going to be on that pesky ship," whatever the name of the ship was. So the Germans are monitoring this. So Patton goes to the ship, and some wall had collapsed in the harbor, and there was all this rust-colored dust in the air. And he goes to the ship, goes up to the captain's cabin, tells a couple of stories, then goes down into the ship, crosses through it, goes to a hatch, and jumps out to a waiting tugboat that whisks him away. So he wouldn't be on that ship. And they even kept like his officer's hat on a table for everyone to see. The ship never got torpedoed or anything like that, but he was on their radar. In fact, when he is moving around the Mediterranean to kind of fool the Axis powers of where the next attack will be, he flies into, I think it was Malta, and decides to fly in an hour early because he's worried about German spies. So he flies an hour early, and he's on the tarmac talking to some British officers. And at the minute that he was supposed to land, all these German aircraft appear in the air. Now, maybe that's coincidental, but maybe he was on their radar. But you get to the point where he's in England, and the British create an army group. They create 2 army groups, one under Montgomery, one under Patton. Montgomery, they're telling the Germans, is going to go into Norway, and Patton's going to go into Calais. It's a very famous Operation Neptune. And if you see the movie, he's like, "Oh, is that all I'm good for, is to be the..." Patton didn't have anything to do with Operation Neptune. These were guys using his name. He only did 2 things for Neptune. He went to an airstrip in East Anglia and watched aircraft take off while he was being photographed. And he was going through a revolving door, and I think he saw James Gavin and said, "See you in Calais." And Gavin's like, "Shit, you're not supposed to talk about anything we're going to, do." That's it. Everything else was British intelligence. But the Germans, with that name, Patton, they followed. Now, you're familiar with the slapping incident at Knutsford?
Of course.
So I addressed this in volume 1, I think. There was not supposed to be any press there. Patton goes and gives a speech, and the speech makes it into newspapers. And one of the newspapers says he failed to mention the Russians. British intelligence agents were trying to sell Operation Fortitude, and the Germans weren't picking up on it. Well, Patton gives this speech, it's in all the newspapers, and the next day the Germans start registering that Patton is in England. So there is evidence that Patton was set up by British intelligence to have himself exposed, and that was not his fault. So there you go.
Okay, thank you. One last quick thing. I'm interested in your tours. If I invite you to connect on LinkedIn, would you be able to send me the information?
Sure. Or you just Google Stephen Ambrose historical tours and you'll see the Patton tour right there. We're all full for this summer. I got 35 people, but we'd love to have you next summer. But I'll be happy to do whatever you want.
Yeah, I'll connect on LinkedIn, please. Thank you.
Sounds good.
All right, thank you.
Thanks, Mark. Alex, if you want to unmute your line and ask your question.
Yeah, thanks,
Hey,
Greg.
Napoleon.
Okay. And Kevin, yeah. So I one again, of course, the famous debate is, again, Patton's always shown us, he wants to do a pincer movement, including from the north and to, pinch off the German salient and, capture, eliminate a lot of their guys. And of course, Montgomery gets criticized. Oh, he just wants to push them from the west, and he allowed, the Germans to escape. So I wonder, is that really Patton's plan, is that whole argument, is that exaggerated, or do you see something to it?
Oh no, Patton is constantly thinking about, as he says, getting the enemy to dance to our tune, which is the positive side. The negative side is he's very nervous. He's always saying, I've got to attack them before they attack me. He's so worried about getting attacked by the Germans that's what drives a lot of his offensives. And you'll see that in a lot of my books, where I got that out of his diaries and letters, that he's like, I got to hit him tomorrow. Guys are saying we need to delay, but God, I can see the Germans attacking us. We got to attack first. So that's very much a part of his thinking. Now, Montgomery on his side, through North Africa, all the fighting down there, what he sees is the British constantly breaking up their formations, like sending guys to Cyprus or to Crete, just when they're going well, because Churchill's trying to plug gaps. And he's like, this is a terrible idea. We keep getting defeated. So I'm going to bring all my troops together. I'm going to train them. We're going to plan out the battle. It's going to be set piece. And that's how we'll get the Germans to dance to our tune. So you can see where it's rooted in British defeats, that he sees how to do victory. And it's a very simple but effective method. And so he sticks to that. Now, when the Germans attack in the Battle of the Bulge, he's planning his next phase. And in fact, there's evidence that he's holding back British divisions because he wants to use those to go on the attack. And he really sees this as an American problem that the Americans should be solving. And he does come under criticism for that. So, and his philosophy, like, if I go attack while the Germans are at their strongest, all it's going to do is knock out my troops. Like it's happened 100 times to the British Army before this, So he's got a very sound strategy: hold the line, let them break on the rocks, But when you've got a bigger campaign going on and somebody's actually making motion, if you've got a stable front, the Germans have a stable front, they can send troops to stop Patton. Whereas if I think Montgomery had been on the attack, that would have occupied the Germans and prevented as many defending against Patton as possible. So, you could lay some of that blame on Eisenhower for not telling Montgomery, get moving. And he would fly out there and have meetings with Montgomery, and Montgomery would stall, but Montgomery would promise a certain date. And he's like, okay, he says, on this day he's going to move. And then Montgomery would move it back. And Eisenhower just incredibly frustrated with all that.
Right. Second question is, again, around December 21st, two regiments of the 106th Infantry Division, they get surrounded near St. Vith and forced to surrender. So I was wondering, is that the fault of the local commander? Is that 8th Corps commander's fault? Or is that the higher ups, responsible for that? Yeah.
What's that term? Victory has a million fathers and defeat is an orphan. Right. I hate to do it. I put it the division commander, General Jones. Now, granted, he did not have good communications with his corps commander, and a lot of stuff was lost in translation. The division had only been online barely a week at the most, and the Germans were able to isolate 2 of his regiments. The third one did pull back intact. But no, those 2 regiments did surrender, and he was, according to, God, was it Ernest? No, it was I can't think of his name, the 7th Armored Division commander that comes in one of Patton's favorite, Bruce, General Bruce, comes in, and he thinks Jones is just like catatonic.
Oh,
One
yeah.
of Jones's son was a lieutenant in one of those regiments, and for some reason they're stacking the dead outside of his headquarters.
Ooh.
And no, I'm sorry, the hospital was right near his headquarters, so we could hear all the moans and groans of the injured. And he was like, "This is really affecting this guy." So I think it was him. It's interesting. One of the commanders that surrenders, one of the regimental commanders, his name was Devereaux, and I was interviewing a veteran, and he said one of the guys from the unit broke out, ran over to an officer, and punched him in the face.
Oh.
And I'm like, I think that was Devereaux, because they were really mad about having to surrender. I've interviewed, I think, 2 guys from the 106. So so that's the story of the 106. So I say Jones. Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you.
Okay, there's a question in the queue, Kevin, if you have time.
Yeah.
Let me read this. Thank you for an interesting presentation. You mentioned the jumbo version of the Sherman tank. Sherman tanks have been criticized in the past. Could you expand on the Sherman tank's performance in the Battle of the Bulge?
Yes. So a lot of the criticism of the Sherman tank comes from the Normandy campaign. In November, upgraded Shermans are going to reach the front. These are called Easy 8s. They've got wider tracks, thicker armor, larger, and a high velocity cannon. That's a big difference maker. The Shermans before that were an equal match to the German Mark IV tank. But we really didn't have any. Germans are the only ones that really have a heavy tank. A lot of the Soviet and American ones are mediums. But there was a lot wrong with those German heavy tanks. They were rushed through production. They have break down quite a bit. And one element that really weakens them, whereas we've got tankers with years of experience training back in the United States, training in England, going across Europe, Hitler is so angry after the assassination attempt on him, the July 20th bomb plot, that he only assigns Tigers to SS units and new SS units. So these young kids that have not been in tanks before and don't have experience. And so that's going to be a big difference maker on the battlefield. I'm just trying to think of toe to toe. So like the relief of Bastogne, there were not a lot of tanks. A lot of the armored had moved on. 1 battalion of tanks, I think, stayed around Bastogne during the siege. The rest of them were, driving for the port or supporting the drive to the port. But I remember this interview I found with these 201st guys. That was at the 1st Battalion 506. They go up to Noville, and they said there were 2 Shermans moving back and forth in this field, firing on the German tanks. And they said the way these guys fired and maneuvered, you would have thought there were 10 tanks. There were just 2. And these tankers, these Shermans really held off quite a number of Tigers and Panthers in this battle. The American tanks, they could reload faster, so they get more rounds off. They could turn the turret faster, so they did have some advantages. So the heavy tanks obviously are the superior tanks with the 88s because they can knock a Sherman out faster. But they were not, made of paper, these American tanks. And that one that Bulge had called a jumbo tank, they just put plate after plate after plate of armor in the front. And the idea was, well, that will be the tank that leads the way. And when they were testing this concept out, they fired a bunch of 75 and 88s at this thing. And they said it looked like a porcupine because of all the shells sticking out because they didn't penetrate that frontal armor. So not a perfect solution, but we're getting there. And of course, in 1945, Pershing tanks in very small numbers will start to arrive at the front.
Nice. I should mention the Cobra King, which was the first tank to, I guess, break through at the Battle of the Bulge and Bastogne. Is actually at the, I think, United States Army Museum at Fort Belvoir. So if anyone's in the area,
it's actually at the National Army Museum.
National Army Museum, right? Yeah. Which is about 20 miles, I think, south of DC. It's a great museum, so people will be able to check it out.
And in fact, it was so big that and a Bradley that first went into Baghdad, they basically brought them in and built the museum around it. I mean, there's amazing photographs of that.
Yeah, no, it is. Great. That concludes our talk for today. Thank you to our speaker for a great lecture and Q&A. Again, the book is Patton's War, An American General's Combat Leadership, Volumes 1, 2, and 3. Today's talk came specifically from Volume 2. Please join us next Saturday, May 16th at 1 p.m. when historian Phil Orbanes will discuss his book, Monopoly X, How Top Secret World War II Operations Used the Game of Monopoly to Help Allied POWs, which reveals how British and American military intelligence successfully smuggled escape aids into German POW camps hidden inside Monopoly game boards. So that should be an interesting talk. Until then, thank you very much for joining us today. And Kevin, thanks for a great talk. Really enjoyed it.
Glad to do it, Greg.
Take care, everyone. Thank you.
Take care.